It was a typical Sunday evening, and I had been feeling uneasy about the family dinner. I wasn't sure if I should show up, but my grandmother had called the night before and insisted that I go. "She's still your mother, Nina. No matter what happens, you'll regret it if you don't go," she had said, her voice filled with concern. Despite my doubts, I decided to push my gut feelings aside and went. I walked into my parents' house, hoping that maybe the tension from last month had cooled off, but as soon as I stepped into the living room, I could feel the cold air hit me like a wall. Dad, standing by the kitchen counter, turned to face me with a red face. Mom, arms crossed tightly, stood beside him, while Ethan, my older brother, sat at the table, his smug expression never changing. "Why are you here?" Dad asked, his voice sharp, almost accusatory. I hesitated. "It's Mom's birthday." Mom cut me off, her tone colder than I had ever heard it. "Either you help your brother, or we don't want you here." Just like that, everything came rushing back. The months of ignoring my calls, the harsh words exchanged. And now, here they were, asking me for something that I had made clear I would never do again. I couldn't believe it. The guilt they tried to place on me felt suffocating, but I stood firm. I looked at Ethan. His grin was almost too much to bear. He knew exactly what was happening. With a heavy heart, I turned around and left. There was no argument, no begging. I just walked out the door, hearing it slam behind me. A month earlier, Ethan had come to me in desperation. He was practically shaking, eyes wide with fear, as he explained his situation. This time, it wasn't just a small mistake, this was serious. He had run up a massive gambling debt, $10,000 to be exact, and now there were people after him. The usual threats, the usual sob stories, how he would pay me back, how I was the only one he could turn to. But I knew better. I had heard it all before. Ethan had a pattern: mess up, beg for help, and then somehow get off the hook, always with my parents coming to his rescue. They never saw the problem. It was always, "He's unlucky," or "He's just struggling with money," as if that made it all okay. But not this time. I wasn't going to be his safety net anymore. "I'm not doing it, Ethan," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the internal battle brewing inside me. His face changed instantly. The tears that had filled his eyes vanished, replaced with a cold, biting anger. "How can you be so heartless?" he snapped, his voice rising. "You're my sister. You're supposed to help me." I shook my head, feeling a coldness seep into my chest. "You did this to yourself. You're always in trouble, always expecting everyone else to clean up after you. I'm done with it." That was all he needed to hear. Without another word, he stormed off, no longer the brother I once knew, but someone bitter and vengeful. I wasn't surprised when he went straight to Mom and Dad. They always took his side, no matter what. The next night, my phone rang. I didn't even get a chance to say hello before. Dad's voice came through, sharp and furious. "How could you do this to your brother? He's family." I didn't even flinch. "I'm not going to bail him out anymore. He got himself into this mess. Let him get himself out." Mom's voice joined in, trembling but insistent. "But you have the money, Nina. You're just being cruel." "He's your brother." I stared at the phone, feeling the anger bubble up inside me. This is his problem. If you want to help him, go ahead. But I'm done. That was the beginning of the silence. Weeks went by, and my attempts to contact them were met with cold responses. Texts were brief and distant. Calls went unanswered. It was as though I had been erased from their lives. At first, it stung. It felt like I had lost my family. But slowly, as time passed, I began to feel a strange relief. My life was quieter, simpler. I focused on my work, spent more time at the gym, and started feeling like I could finally breathe again. For the first time in years, there was no drama. And then, out of nowhere, the phone call came. A month had passed since I walked out of my parents' house. Since then, I'd made it a point not to look back. After everything with Ethan, I thought I'd be fine without them. I didn't need their drama, their manipulations, or their guilt trips. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. Sure, I missed the occasional family gathering, but at least I wasn't constantly wondering when the next crisis would hit. But a month after the fallout, everything changed. The phone call came in the middle of my workday, interrupting the usual quiet rhythm. I had just wrapped up a meeting with a client and was about to grab lunch when I saw my father's name flash across the screen. My gut twisted. I knew it wasn't going to be good. Why was he calling now? After all this time, I hesitated, my finger hovering over the decline button, but curiosity won out. I answered. "Hello?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but my pulse was already racing. Nina, Dad's voice cracked. It wasn't the angry, accusatory tone I had grown used to. This was different, panicked, desperate. Nina, we need to talk. It's urgent. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. It had been weeks since they last contacted me. And now, suddenly, this. A sinking feeling crept into my stomach. Something was wrong. I didn't respond immediately. What's going on? I asked, trying to sound calm, though inside my heart was racing. There was a long pause, as if Dad was gathering the strength to say whatever was coming. Ethan, he's taken everything, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. At first, I didn't understand. I blinked, trying to process his words. What do you mean, everything? I asked, the confusion in my tone genuine. What are you talking about? Everything. Our savings. The joint account. It's all gone. Every last dollar, he continued, his voice trembling with fear. $60,000. Ethan cleaned us out. Took it all. I felt a wave of shock wash over me, followed by a strange sense of detached amusement. Ethan had done it. He had finally crossed the line. I wasn't sure whether to feel sorry for them or just vindicated after all these years of covering for him, making excuses, bailing him out. Now they were paying the price. My parents had always been blind to his behavior. They thought he was just unlucky, a victim of circumstance. But he wasn't. He was reckless, manipulative, and he had made a career out of exploiting their kindness. Now, I was standing on the sidelines, watching them finally realize what I had known all along. I sighed, running a hand through my hair, trying to suppress the growing amusement. She took it all? I repeated, my voice almost casual. Guess she thought she could double it at the casino again, huh? There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically feel the tension building. Nina, this is serious, Dad said, his voice shaking. She transferred the money to an account under her name. We can't get it back, and we don't even know where she is. She won't pick up the phone. I leaned against the desk, my mind working rapidly. Ethan had always been reckless with money, but I never imagined he'd be so bold. Transferring the money into his own account was one thing, but disappearing without a trace? That was something new. It felt surreal, like this was the inevitable consequence of years of enabling him, of my parents thinking they could fix everything for him. And now that he had finally gone too far, they were the ones left to clean up the mess. Why are you calling me? I asked bluntly. I'm not the one who gave him access to the account. You did. You enabled him all these years, and now you're asking me to help you fix it? There was silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Dad breathing heavily, trying to find the right words. I wasn't sure what he was expecting from me. Was I supposed to feel guilty for not helping them? Was I supposed to rush to their aid, like I had always done before? You're our daughter, Nina. We made a mistake, Dad finally said, but we need your help now. We don't know what to do. Please, we don't have anyone else. I didn't know how to respond. I should have said no. I should have walked away and let them deal with their own mess. But despite everything, a small part of me couldn't just hang up. I wasn't sure if it was out of loyalty or just curiosity to see how far Ethan had gone this time, but I agreed to meet them. When I arrived at their house, the atmosphere was thick with tension. My parents looked worn out. Mom had dark circles under her eyes, and Dad's face was drawn with stress. I could see how deeply the situation had affected them, but I wasn't here to comfort them. I was here to figure out just how much damage Ethan had caused. We've been trying to get in touch with the bank, Mom explained, her voice shaky. But the money has already been transferred out. We called the bank, but the account is locked now. We don't know what to do. We don't even know where he is. Dad was pacing the room, his hands clenched into fists. He looked like a man on the edge of a breakdown. Ethan never disappears like this. He's always causing drama, always coming back for help. But now he's gone, and we have nothing. I listened quietly, letting them vent. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment they finally realized they couldn't keep bailing Ethan out of every situation. But instead of feeling the satisfaction I expected, I felt empty. They were desperate. They needed my help. And no matter how angry I was, no matter how many times I had told myself I was done, there was a part of me that still cared. We can get the money back, I said suddenly, interrupting their frantic conversation. They both looked at me, a spark of hope in their eyes. But I wasn't offering a simple solution. No, this was going to be complicated, risky, and probably illegal. What do you mean? Dad asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. I took a deep breath. If Ethan's gambling, he's probably somewhere in the underground scene right now. He's not dumb enough to use the casinos that banned him, but there are places out there that don't care about the rules. We can track him down. Mom's face went pale at the mention of underground gambling rings. You want to go to those places? You think that's a good idea? I'm not going there, I replied flatly, but I know someone who can help. Ryan still has connections in that world. I'll get him to help us track Ethan down. They didn't like it, but they had no other choice. I called Ryan, a former co-worker from my finance days who had gotten mixed up in riskier business ventures. He was more than capable of finding Ethan, and when I told him what happened, he immediately promised to help. The next few hours were filled with nothing but waiting. Ryan promised to send me an address if he found any leads. In the meantime, my parents sat in silence, their faces a mixture of anxiety and guilt. I couldn't help but feel a little satisfaction at their predicament. This was the moment they had been blind to for so long. They had chosen to ignore the warning signs for years, and now Ethan had taken everything they had worked for. A few hours later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Ryan. I've got an address. You're not going to like it. I showed it to my parents. Dad looked like he had seen a ghost. The address Ryan had sent pointed straight to a part of town known for its underground gambling establishments, places where no one asked questions, and the stakes were far higher than a regular casino. We need to go now, Mom said, panic rising in her voice. No, I said firmly, shaking my head. We'll wait. We can't rush in there. Trust me, if we make a scene, we'll get thrown out in no time. Let Ryan handle it. And so we waited, all of us in silence, while the real work began. In this part, Nina grapples with her decision to finally return to her family's aid. Despite everything that's happened, she feels both detached and invested, watching them realize the consequences of their years of enabling Ethan. The idea of tracking down Ethan in the underground gambling world shows just how deep the situation has gone, and Nina's role in it shifts from bystander to problem solver, albeit reluctantly. The silence that hung in the room was suffocating. Mom, Dad, and I sat at the kitchen table, waiting for any sign that something was happening. I had my phone in hand, scrolling mindlessly through messages, pretending to focus while my mind ran through a dozen possible scenarios. A part of me felt guilty for not jumping into action sooner, but another part of me, the part that had grown so weary of the same mistakes being made over and over again, was content to sit back and wait for the inevitable fallout. I knew they were expecting me to be the one to fix everything, just like I always had. They were still looking at me like I was their last hope, but this wasn't going to be as easy as their usual rescues. Ethan had crossed a line this time, and they were paying the price. Mom couldn't sit still. She kept pacing the kitchen, her footsteps a rhythmic tap that only added to the tension in the air. Dad was sitting at the table, running his hands through his hair, every line on his face etched with stress. Neither of them looked at me, and I didn't expect them to. They had never fully understood why I refused to bail Ethan out. Why, after everything he had done, I still couldn't bring myself to forgive him, to save him from his own consequences. Eventually, Mom stopped pacing and turned to me, her voice quiet but pleading. Nina, what are we going to do? We need to get the money back. Please, there has to be something you can do. I kept my eyes down, studying my phone, pretending not to notice the desperation in her voice. I already told you, I said without looking up. We'll wait for Ryan. If anyone can track down Ethan, it's him. But how do you even know where to look? Dad asked, his voice cracking with the strain. What if she's already spent it all? What if we never see it again? I sighed, finally looking up at them. You've had years to deal with Ethan's problems, Dad. Years. You kept bailing him out, and now, look where we are. Dad flinched, but I didn't care. I wasn't here to make him feel better. I wasn't here to ease his guilt. I was here to get the money back, and that meant facing the truth. They had raised Ethan to think there were no consequences to his actions. They had let him ruin everything. The room fell silent again, but I could see them both processing what I said, their faces hardening, accepting the reality of their choices. I wasn't sure how much time had passed when my phone buzzed again, breaking the stillness. Ryan's name flashed on the screen, and I could feel the tension in my body coil tighter. I answered the call quickly, not wasting any time. "Nina," Ryan said, his voice low and serious. "I've got the address. I know where Ethan's at." "Where?" I asked, barely holding back my impatience. "It's an old underground casino," Ryan continued. "The kind of place that doesn't ask questions. It's tucked away in the bad part of town, real low key. Ethan's definitely there, and it's probably the only place he'd go. I don't think he's realized what he's walked into yet." I could hear the faint sound of cars in the background, and it struck me that Ryan was probably already out there, waiting for me to make the next move. I turned to my parents, who were now staring at me with wide eyes, the realization sinking in that this was not going to be easy. "It's in the old district. I need to go. I need to get him out of there before he gambles away everything else he has." Dad stood up abruptly, his hands clenched into fists. "Nina, you can't go alone. You need help. This is too dangerous." I shook my head, my gaze hardening. "I'm not asking for help. I'm the only one who can do this. Ethan's messed this up for himself, but I'm not going to let him dig himself deeper." The thought of Ethan being stuck in a place like that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just the money he had taken. It was everything, his complete disregard for anyone but himself. I could already see the image in my head. Ethan, sitting at a table, surrounded by people who didn't care whether he lost everything as long as they made a profit. "You don't understand," I continued, my voice steady but filled with a quiet rage. "This is the kind of place that doesn't care who you are or how much you've lost. If Ethan's at one of these places, he's probably gambling with people who won't hesitate to do anything to get their money back. And if he loses everything, they won't just let him go." Mom's face twisted in fear, and I could see her hands trembling. She opened her mouth to say something, but I held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not going in there unprepared. Ryan has contacts. He knows people in that world. If anyone can track him down, it's him." There was a moment of silence before Dad spoke, his voice quiet but determined. "I don't like it, but I know you're right. We can't leave him out there." I looked at him, not expecting the support, but I appreciated it nonetheless. This was the first time they had acknowledged how serious this situation was. They finally understood that there was no going back from this. Ryan had sent me an address, and I didn't waste any more time. I grabbed my coat, my phone in hand, and walked out the door without looking back at my parents. The drive to the old district felt long and unnerving. The streets grew darker as I neared the area. The buildings old and abandoned, the kind of place you didn't visit unless you had no other choice. As I parked near the address Ryan had given me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. Ryan was already there, leaning against a black sedan, his expression grim. "You came alone?" he asked, raising an eyebrow as I approached. "I don't need anyone else," I said, my voice firm. I wasn't going to let anyone else get involved in this mess. Ryan didn't argue. Instead, he led me to the entrance of the underground casino. The place was dark, the air thick with the smell of cigarettes and stale beer. The faint sounds of clinking chips and muffled voices filled the space. It looked like any other seedy underground gambling den filled with men and women who had nowhere else to turn. Ryan led me through the maze of tables, past people who didn't even look up as we walked by. At the far end of the room, I spotted Ethan sitting at a high-stakes blackjack table, his face tense with concentration. He didn't even notice me at first. When he finally looked up, I saw the shock register on his face. His expression shifted quickly, from surprise to defiance. "Nina," he muttered, the contempt clear in his voice. "What are you doing here?" I stood still, my eyes fixed on him. "You've lost everything, Ethan, and now you're gambling with people who will make sure you never get out of here." He scoffed, clearly trying to brush me off. "You think I need your help? I'm fine." "You're not fine," I said, my voice low and steady. "And I'm not leaving here without you. You've done enough damage." He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I don't need your help," he spat, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. I could see it now, the desperation, the realization that he had no way out. He had gambled everything away, including his last chance. "Let's go," I said, my voice firm. Ryan stepped forward, his presence like a quiet threat. Ethan's defiance flickered for a moment, but then he collapsed, slumping into the chair as if all his strength had drained away. "I messed up, didn't I?" he whispered, his voice small. You messed up a long time ago, I replied, pulling him away from the table. We left the casino without looking back, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in control. The ride home was silent. Ethan sat in the back seat, his eyes downcast, his shoulders slumped as if the weight of his failures had suddenly caught up with him. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and oppressive, but I didn't care. I had done what needed to be done. I had pulled him out of that mess. I had saved him, but for what? Would he even understand the gravity of what had just happened? Would he learn anything this time? Or would it just be another instance of the cycle repeating itself? Ryan dropped us off at my parents' house without a word. He didn't need to say anything. He had done his part. He had pulled the strings in the underground world and made sure that Ethan wasn't going to end up owing his life to the wrong people. I had made my own deal with him, one that didn't involve me getting personally involved in the underworld. But Ryan had connections, and that was all that mattered. As I walked inside the house, the door creaking opened slowly. I saw Mom and Dad sitting in the living room, both of them staring at the floor. It was as if they were waiting for something. Maybe an apology, maybe a miracle, but all I could think about was how the situation had gone from bad to worse in such a short time. The same blind loyalty they had shown Ethan for years had led them here, and now they expected me to fix everything. Mom, Dad, I said, my voice breaking the silence. He's back. My parents both looked up at the same time, eyes wide. A flicker of hope passed between them, but it was quickly followed by the guilt. They knew what they had done. They knew how much damage they had caused. And yet, they still couldn't seem to take responsibility for it. Dad stood up first, his face pale and tired, his clothes wrinkled as if he had been waiting for this moment for hours. Where is he asked, voice strained, his hands shaking slightly as he spoke. He's in the car, I said, gesturing toward the front yard. I wasn't about to go into the details of how I had dragged him out of an underground gambling den. I wasn't going to lay out the fact that Ethan had been at the mercy of people who would have gladly broken his bones if it meant they could collect their money. They didn't need to know that. All they needed to know was that I had done what they couldn't. They didn't move immediately. Instead, they just stared at each other for a moment, as if searching for some kind of justification for what had happened. I could see the wheels turning in their heads, each one of them, struggling to understand how it had all gone so terribly wrong. How they had let their son spiral out of control. How they had let him manipulate them for years without ever realizing the harm he was causing. Finally, Mom stood up and walked slowly to the door, Dad following behind her. I watched them both, my arms crossed, my mind racing with all the words I wanted to say but couldn't. They hadn't just failed Ethan, they had failed me too. All those years of asking for help, trying to make them understand why they needed to stop enabling him, and this was where we ended up. Ethan was standing outside the car when they approached. He didn't look at them. He didn't even acknowledge them, as if the shame of everything he had done had finally broken him down. For the first time, I didn't see that smug attitude or that air of entitlement he always carried with him. All that was left was a broken man. I could see the pain in their eyes as they looked at him. They had been defending him for so long, covering for him, making excuses for him. But now, they had no choice but to face the truth. The truth was staring them in the face, and there was no more pretending that everything would magically get fixed with one more bailout. Ethan, Dad said softly, his voice cracking. Where have you been? What happened? Ethan didn't answer. He just stared at the ground, unable to look his father in the eye. I could tell he was ashamed. For once, the pride that had always kept him from admitting his mistakes had been stripped away. But that didn't change the fact that he had hurt them, hurt all of us. Mom stepped forward, tears welling in her eyes. Please, she whispered, we're your parents. We just want to help you. Ethan finally looked up at her, his expression torn. You don't get it, he said, his voice low and almost broken. I've ruined everything. I could see it now, the realization. Ethan had finally acknowledged the mess he had made, but it was too little, too late. The damage had already been done, and the people who had always been there for him were now sitting in front of him, waiting for answers they weren't sure they were going to get. I couldn't let them continue like this. I couldn't sit by and watch them fall into the same trap they always fell into. I had seen it too many times before. Ethan's sob stories, his promises to change, his promises to pay everything back, and then his betrayal. It had been a cycle for as long as I could remember, and I wasn't about to let it happen again. I'm done, I said, my voice firm, cutting through the tension. I'm done saving you, Ethan. I'm done watching you destroy everything, including our family. You need to deal with this yourself." Mom looked at me, her face crumpling as if I had just stabbed her in the heart. "Nina, please." "No," I said, my voice unwavering. "You can't keep enabling him, Mom. You've been doing it for years, and look where it's gotten us. You need to let him face the consequences. All these years of bailing him out, and this is what happens." I turned away from them, unable to keep the anger from boiling over. I wasn't angry at Ethan anymore. I was angry at myself for continuing to let them pull me back in, even though I had known better. I had done the right thing by walking away from them a month ago, and I had done the right thing by pulling Ethan out of that casino, but I knew it wouldn't stop. This would never stop until they realized they needed to change too. Later that night, I sat in my room, staring out the window, lost in thought. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I didn't know if Ethan would finally take responsibility for his actions, or if this was just another chapter in his endless cycle of lies and manipulation. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to keep playing the same role in his life anymore. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control, and that control was something I was never going to give up again. This final part encapsulates Nina's decision to stop enabling Ethan's destructive behavior, even as her parents continue to struggle with accepting the consequences of their actions. It shows the emotional toll this dynamic has taken on Nina, as well as her resolution to stand firm and stop the cycle of forgiveness that has only allowed Ethan to continue his harmful behavior. It also marks the end of her role as the family's fixer, leaving her with a sense of closure, even if the future remains uncertain. Story 2. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of rearranged schedules, skipped shifts, and canceled plans, all to take care of my mother-in-law, Beatrice. And yet, nothing I did seemed to satisfy her. "Emily always knows exactly how I like my soup," Beatrice announced, pushing the bowl I had just set in front of her away, as if it were an insult. "This is too salty, Clara. The carrots are cut too thick. I can't believe you're a nurse and you don't understand the importance of proper food preparation for someone recovering from surgery." I stood frozen in her pristine kitchen, still in my nursing scrubs from my morning shift, trying to maintain composure. I had been her caregiver for 3 weeks, straight after her hip surgery, and I still couldn't meet her standards. All the while, Beatrice's daughter Emily was the golden child who managed to drop by for 45 minutes every Sunday, always impeccably put together in her designer clothes and perfectly manicured nails. "I'm sorry, Beatrice. Let me make you another bowl," I offered, my fingers already reaching for the soup, but my wedding ring caught the light, and for a brief moment, I remembered what today was supposed to be, our 10th anniversary dinner. Instead of enjoying it with Ben, I was here, doing everything I could to help Beatrice, only to be criticized at every turn. Beatrice continued, without a hint of irony. "You know, Emily learned all my preferences years ago. She has such attention to detail just like me. Maybe you could ask her for some tips." She paused to look at her phone. "Oh, Emily just texted me pictures of the organic vegetables she bought for my next soup. Isn't she thoughtful?" The knot in my stomach tightened. At 32, I had spent more than a decade saving lives in the cardiac unit at Memorial Hospital. But here I was, unable to make soup for Beatrice to her exact liking. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just last week, I had managed a code blue, handling a crisis that could have cost someone their life. But in Beatrice's eyes, the thickness of carrot slices seemed to carry more weight. I glanced at the photos on Beatrice's kitchen wall. Most of them featured Emily's perfect smile, her flawless presence. The one photo of Ben and me from our wedding was tucked in the corner, partially hidden behind a potted plant. I had fought for its placement. Beatrice had insisted it disrupted the flow of her carefully arranged gallery. The sound of the garage door opening made my heart leap. Ben was home early. I turned, desperate to see a friendly face, but before I could even move, Beatrice was already calling out. "Oh, that must be Emily. She mentioned she might stop by today. Clara, dear, why don't you go warm up some of that herbal tea Emily brought last week? She knows exactly how I like it served." I took a deep breath and counted to 10. Patience. The past 3 weeks had been a masterclass in it, and Beatrice's constant comparisons to Emily had only driven the lesson home. It was exhausting. The footsteps in the garage belonged to Ben, not Emily. He appeared in the doorway, tired but smiling. "Hi, Mom," he greeted, leaning in to kiss Beatrice's cheek. "How are you feeling today?" Beatrice sighed dramatically. I'm managing, though it would be so much better if Emily could be here more often. She has such a natural touch with these things. She brightened, reaching for her phone again. Look at these lovely vegetables she's buying for me. Clara, dear, you really should take notes. Ben's eyes flicked to me, a look of concern crossing his face. He knew what today was supposed to be a quiet evening, just the two of us, celebrating our anniversary. Instead, I was here, being compared to his sister yet again. Actually, Mom, Ben said, cutting in. Clara's been here every day for the past 3 weeks. Maybe it's time Emily takes a turn. Clara hasn't had a full night's sleep in her own bed since your surgery? Beatrice waved him off. Oh, but Emily's so busy with her interior design business. She can't possibly take time off like Clara can. Besides, Clara's a nurse. This is what she does. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I finally spoke, my voice trembling. Is working in cardiac care at Memorial Hospital not good enough for you, Beatrice? I save lives. I don't spend my days cutting carrots to exact specifications. The kitchen fell silent. Ben's hand went to my shoulder, but I shrugged it off, the frustration of the past 3 weeks bubbling to the surface. I moved in here to help you recover, Beatrice, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though the words were coming out faster than I could stop them. I used my vacation days, rescheduled my shifts, and canceled our anniversary plans. I've been here every single day, while Emily drops by once a week with organic vegetables and fancy tea. Beatrice's expression hardened. Well, when Emily visits, she doesn't make me feel guilty about it. Jealous. The word came out of her mouth like a slap. You're jealous of Emily's weekly visits and her organic vegetables? The word stung, but I refused to let her see it. I'm not jealous, Beatrice, I said quietly. I'm exhausted, I'm frustrated, and I'm done pretending that this situation is okay. Ben stepped in, clearly uncomfortable with the rising tension. Mom, Clara's right. This isn't fair. Emily needs to step up and help more. Beatrice's face contorted in a mixture of shock and indignation. Well, I never. Before she could finish, I snapped. No, you never. You never saw what I've been doing for the past 3 weeks. I'm not asking for praise, but I'm not going to be compared to Emily every day either. The room was heavy with silence, and Ben placed his hand on my shoulder again. But this time, I didn't flinch. Beatrice clutched her chest, her voice rising in panic. But who will take care of me? I grabbed my purse from the counter, my hands shaking. I'm going home, Ben. I need some space. Before anyone could respond, I was already heading for the door. But who will take care of me? Beatrice's voice cracked with panic. I paused in the doorway, turning back to face her. Call Emily. Tell her you need her. See what happens. The drive home was a blur. Tears blurred my vision, and my phone kept buzzing with messages from Emily, ranting about my abandonment of her mother. Ben sent several messages asking me to come back, to work things out at home, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. When I finally got home, I locked myself in the bathroom, letting the hot water soothe my tense muscles as the weight of everything I had been carrying over the past 3 weeks came crashing down on me. I wasn't a superhero. I was just a woman who was trying to do her best in an impossible situation. I changed into my own comfortable clothes, not the nursing scrubs I'd been living in for the last few weeks, and poured myself a glass of wine. As I sank into the couch, my phone rang. It was Emily. Clara, how could you just leave Mom like that? She asked, her voice laced with faux concern. She's family. I sighed, sipping my wine. Funny, I've been thinking about family a lot lately. About how some family members show up for 3 weeks straight, and others manage 45 minutes on Sundays. You know how busy I am, Emily protested. I have clients who depend on me. Emily, I don't think you understand, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. My job is at Memorial Hospital. What I've been doing for your mother is called being family, and that's supposed to be a shared responsibility. Emily's voice became syrupy sweet. If you can't handle it, I suppose I could try to move some things around. Maybe next week. I interrupted her. Your mother needs someone tonight, right now. She needs help getting up the stairs, taking her evening medications, and preparing for bed. Can you go over? There was a long pause on the line. Tonight? She asked, her voice edged with annoyance. I couldn't possibly. I have a client presentation to prepare. I bit back a laugh. That's what I thought, I said quietly. You know, Emily, I continued, my voice steady now. For 3 weeks, I've listened to Beatrice sing your praises. How you bring the perfect tea, cut the perfect carrots, choose the perfect organic vegetables. But where are you when she needs help showering? Where are you during the long nights when her hip pain keeps her awake? Emily sputtered in outrage. I'm doing my best. No, I said firmly. You're doing what's convenient. There's a difference. I felt a strange calm settle over me. So here's what's going to happen. Either you step up and take your turn caring for your mother, or we can stop pretending that bringing fancy tea once a week makes you daughter of the year. The silence on the line was deafening. The following days were surprisingly quiet. I got back to my normal routine, taking shifts at the hospital, trying to catch up on sleep, and avoiding the guilt-laden messages Beatrice had been sending me. Ben kept me updated, telling me that Emily had made excuses about work and was leaving Beatrice to rely on a hastily arranged home health aide. It wasn't exactly a solution, but it was a start. It wasn't until nearly a week later, just before I was about to settle in for the evening, that I got the call. I was sitting on the couch, finally able to relax, when the phone rang. Beatrice's name flashed across the screen. My stomach tightened. I wasn't ready for another confrontation, but I answered anyway. Clara. Beatrice's voice was small this time, not her usual commanding tone. I'm sorry. The aide isn't working out. She doesn't understand my needs like you do. I sank deeper into the couch, my heart aching. I knew this was coming. Have you called Emily? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Beatrice's reply was barely a whisper. She's not answering her phone. She texted saying she's swamped with a big project. She paused. I thought maybe you could help? I took a deep breath. No, Beatrice, I said softly but firmly. I can't come back right now. There was a long silence on the other end before Beatrice spoke again, her voice trembling. But you're my daughter-in-law. I know, I said, my throat tightening. And for 3 weeks, I was there every day, doing everything I could to help you recover. But all I heard was how Emily does everything better, how she brings the perfect vegetables and makes the perfect tea. It wasn't fair. There was a pause. I could hear Beatrice sniffling. I've been horrible to you, haven't I? The words cut through me. Yes, Beatrice. It really hurt. She let out a deep sigh, her voice quivering. I think I've always felt guilty about Emily. After her father and I divorced, she stayed with him. She chose him. I told myself it was because of his money, his connections. But maybe I wasn't a good enough mother. The knot in my chest loosened as I listened to her. This was a side of Beatrice I hadn't seen before, vulnerable, unsure. Beatrice, I said quietly, Emily's choices aren't your fault, and making me feel inadequate won't make her more present in your life. Beatrice was quiet for a long time. I know that now, she said softly. The past few days, lying here alone, I've had plenty of time to think. The aide is competent, but she's not you. She doesn't ask about my garden, or remember which mysteries I like to watch, or laugh at my terrible jokes about hospital food. I felt my eyes welling up with tears. I couldn't help it. Those carrots weren't really too thick, were they? Beatrice let out a quiet laugh, one I hadn't heard in weeks. No, dear. The soup was perfect. I was just being a spiteful old woman. I chuckled through my tears. You're not that old, Clara, Beatrice said, her voice turning serious again. I'm not asking you to come back. I don't deserve that. But I am asking for your forgiveness, and maybe a chance to be a better mother-in-law. I wiped away a tear, my heart softening. We can work on that, I said, my voice gentle but resolute. But first, we need to set some boundaries, and Emily needs to do her part. The next day, Ben organized a family meeting. Emily showed up late, clutching her designer handbag, looking more annoyed than anything else. She barely made eye contact with me, as if the very sight of me was an inconvenience. But Beatrice didn't immediately light up at her daughter's arrival like she usually did. That was new. Emily, Beatrice said firmly, her voice strong. You need to take 2 days a week to help with my recovery, not just 45 minutes on Sundays, not fancy tea deliveries, real help. Emily's perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up. Mom, you know I can't possibly. Yes, you can, Beatrice interrupted, her voice unwavering. I've watched Clara rearrange her entire life to help me, while you've done nothing but criticize from the sidelines. That stops now. I watched Emily's face cycle through shock, anger, and finally, shame. She wasn't used to being called out, and I couldn't deny that a part of me found satisfaction in seeing her uncomfortable for once. I didn't realize, she murmured, her voice small. Ben stepped in, his voice quiet but firm. No, you didn't, because you weren't here to see it. We worked out a schedule. I'll help 3 days a week. Emily will take 2, and I'll cover the weekends. The home health aide will fill in the gaps. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Beatrice wasn't just accepting the situation. She was standing up for herself. And finally, Emily would have to pull her weight. That evening, as I was gathering my things to head home, Beatrice called me back. "Clara," she said, holding out a small wrapped package. "Happy belated anniversary." I opened it to find a framed photo. Not one of Emily's perfectly staged portraits, but a candid shot of Ben and me at last year's family barbecue, laughing at something off camera. And it wasn't hidden behind any plants. Beatrice smiled, a real smile this time. "I'm putting it right here," she said, pointing to the center of her photo wall, "where it belongs." I felt a lump in my throat, but I didn't fight it. "Thank you," I said quietly, genuinely touched. 6 months later, Beatrice's recovery had progressed steadily, though not without its hiccups. Emily actually showed up for most of her assigned days, though she complained constantly about her disrupted schedule. The difference now was that Beatrice didn't rush to soothe her or praise her minimal efforts. Emily's visits had become more about obligation than love, and Beatrice wasn't about to make excuses for her anymore. During one of my regular visits now just for coffee, not for care, Beatrice surprised me by pulling out an old photo album. "I want to show you something," she said, flipping to a worn page. This was me right after my divorce. Emily was 12. The photo showed a younger Beatrice standing alone at what looked like Emily's middle school graduation. The smile on her face was forced, her eyes sad. "I spent 20 years trying to buy Emily's love with praise and permission to treat everyone around her poorly," Beatrice said quietly, her voice heavy with regret, "including you. But you know what? The only real love I've felt has come from the people who show up, who do the hard things, who stay even when it's not convenient." She reached for my hand, her fingers trembling. "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to." I squeezed her hand back. "That's what real family does." Later that evening, as Ben and I were getting ready for bed, he wrapped his arms around me from behind. "You know what Mom said to me yesterday?" he murmured against my hair. "What's that?" I asked, my voice soft. "She said she finally has the daughter she always wanted." He paused. "She meant you," I smiled, thinking of the photo now prominently displayed on Beatrice's wall, the one that had once been hidden away. Sometimes, the family you choose and the ones who choose you back are the ones that matter most. And as for the carrots, well, they're still too thick sometimes, but now we just laugh about it over coffee, like real families should.